Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about Node and tests, right? All together, everything in one single place. I'm going to present you the new things about the Node.js Test Runner, which is not actually very new, but it's something that we are still not using quite a lot. Okay. So first of all, who am I? My name is Lucas Santos. I am a senior software engineer here at Klarna in Sweden. I'm originally from Brazil, so I'm in quite cold place. But I am a content producer. I do a lot of code and a lot of content in my YouTube channels, in my social networks in general. Some in Portuguese, some in English. I have a lot of articles. If you want to read any of them, just reach out to me in one of these social networks here down below. So basically it's twitter.lsantos.dev, any social network.lsantos.dev, okay? I'm also one of the Google developer experts for web technologies, Microsoft MVP for developer technologies, and Docker Captain. So these are mostly the content that I create. And today I'm going to talk about Node and tests, okay? So to start, what is my objective here? First things first, my goal with this presentation. I want you to forget Jest completely, right? Jest is the most common one, is the most used test runner that we have today. But do I hate Jest? No, not at all. We use it a lot in Klarna. But I had my fair share of trying to, create boilerplate code and my fair share of problems with Jest. And I think there is an easier way, and I think there is something better. It's time to try something new. Jest has been, old for a while. And it's just this, basically. It's quite that simple. So please let me know if I convinced you in my social. So reach out to me, and if I convinced you, drop me a line. I'm going to be super, hyper blessed, hyper glad that I am convinced you to use Node.js Test Runner. But how I'm going to do this? I'm going to do this by show you something that is possibly better. But why possibly better, right? Just because the test runner is still being improved actively, right? It's something that we're still working on it, and well, you can already use it. It's stable in the Node 20. So you need to be in Node 20 at least to use it in a stable version, but it's stable, it's production ready, you can use it. We have already used it in Klarna for a while. I used it in all my projects, my new projects. So the first thing that I want to bring to our attention in this is what is actually bad about the current test runners. Why what we have today isn't enough, right? Why do we keep looking for something new? Why do we have so many of them? Well, first of all, the first thing, they are very difficult to configure, especially if you're configuring them for TypeScript. And configure things like runners like Jest is a pain, especially those Jest config files, Jest config.js, Jest config.json. There's so many things, so many options, things that were added over time. So it's a very old system. So it keeps like growing over time. It does it all. It transforms, it parses, it moves, it asserts, it hoists everything. It has an importer, it has a loader, it has basically everything. It's just too many things. That's just Jest, right? There's others. There are others. There are smaller. Those things actually make them really slow, right? You cannot have all these features and expect something to be fast. So in Klarna, we do have tests that take at least 10 seconds just to start up, just to configure it, to run all the environment and everything, to configure the environment. So it's slow, it's not easy. And I have a concept that's called YAL. So YAL, it's yet another library, right? So it's yet another library on top of a project. Runners should be a thing from your runtime. Your runtime should actually provide you with a runner like Dino does for Dino test, and we have Bun with Bun test and a bunch of things. But they shouldn't be an extra library that you just like add on top of your project and you have to take care of. Remember that each library that you add on top of your project is an external code that you don't own and you don't maintain, but you still rely on, right? So it's an important thing to remember. And also test runners, they seem not to be interested in cooperate with each other because none of them actually work together. So you cannot port one thing to another. They all have completely different configurations. Most of them are really not talking to each other in any sort of way. So they make sure that you will only be able to use them as the test runner and nothing else. That makes your life very difficult if you want to switch from one to the other. And most of them are really opinionated, so they are really not extensible. Some of them are too extensible. There's just not a middle ground. You are either too opinionated or you're either not opinionated at all, and you have to configure like 5,000 lines in a boilerplate every time you have to run a test. So yeah, it's quite difficult. And if you want TypeScript, but if you don't want to use like TS well, good luck, because TypeScript is the nemesis of most test runners. They're particularly hard to configure when you want to transpile TypeScript to JavaScript on the fly, or if you want to actually write your code in TypeScript, your test in TypeScript as well. Mostly because you either have to download another library, so yet another library to parse and transform and move things around. But in general, this shouldn't be the case because Node supports transpiling on the fly by default. It's native. You don't actually have to do it, right? So the final thing is that there's just so many of them. Like, it's overwhelming. It's too much. So here enters the Node.js Test Runner. Right, so the Node.js Test Runner is not that new. I would say it's a new thing, but it's not. It's really not that new. It came up in April 15, 2022, as you can see here in the PR here on the top, by a guy, a very nice guy called Colin. Right, so Colin is basically one of the main maintainers of the Test Runner since then. So it's a very, very, very interesting project. Later on, one of my colleagues at Microsoft, actually one of my former colleagues at Microsoft, Vassing, he added the support for the top parser. This was in November, like 6 months later, right? So it was super, super cool that they were adding the top parsers on the whole thing. And then it was soon made stable. Basically, I think this was on February last year. So basically, they made it stable on the Node 20 release. And then it's quite usable. It's actually pretty usable. You can use it. I've used it a lot of times. But why is it different from other things? And why am I so, fiercely advocating for this? Well, first and foremost, let me take this out of the screen. First and foremost is built-in. It's no y'all, right? So no, you add another library. You don't have extra libraries. You can actually only use the test runner with built-in libraries. You don't need to install anything else. Even if you want to run TypeScript, well, obviously you have to install TypeScript, but then you can also run it without installing like anything else in your system, right? It is pretty fast, like pretty damn fast. And it's, sometimes people compare one thing to the other because you have other test runners with caches and stuff like this. And yes, then Node test becomes a bit slower because it doesn't have caching techniques. Well, it's about 1 year old. So yeah, but it's still pretty fast. I'm going to show you some benchmarks of this. Not benchmarks, but I'm going to show you some running tests of this one. There's no need to configuration. So it basically integrates with Node. It's part of Node. So it's integrating seamlessly with Node every time. And you can use native assertions or any other assertion library. You don't need to import or install anything if you don't want to. Jest uses, I think there's Shy or Expect, but Node, you don't need to do it. You can use Node assert. Jest, you can also use assert if you want. It outputs a TAP, which is test anything protocol. And it's a protocol to, test anything. So you can integrate with other runners or even other parsers. So basically you can read your code and integrate with code coverage tools and things like that. So this is not actually very, different from the other ones because some of them also do the same. But this one is native and you can implement it naturally. So you can always use up-to-date Node features. If you're using Node, you will always make sure that everything that version of Node includes it's in your code as well. So it's consistent across every project. So imagine if you have like a monorepo with 5,000 small projects, it's basically consistency. You don't have external libraries, external stuff. There's no polyfills needed if you want to do things. So, well, you don't have to babble things up. You don't have to ES build. You don't have to webpack. You don't have to do anything. Basically, you can just do your tests the way you want them to do. The experimental support for the code coverage and other reporters is still there. So the Node test, I'm going to do this. There's a whole slide about this, but Node Test Runner supports both code coverage and different test reporters. So you can actually put on anything that you want. Let's talk about this later on. But it also supports TypeScript out of the box. So the only thing you need to do is to install TypeScript or a parser, whatever you want to do, SWC or TSC, TSX. You can choose it and use it as of importers, which was called loaders back then. So I'm going to also show this in the end. So stay around. And I'm going to show this to you. So getting started, you don't need anything to get started. Just like import the node test package. You can just import as test. You can also import this, the node assert library if you want to, but if you don't want to use assert, then you're good to go. So the first thing we're going to do here, I'm going to define a like index.js file with a sum function. It's a very simple function. I'm not here to show you complex use cases of the test runner, but then the next thing we can just create our tests. And the node test also supports the describe and it feature. So you can import them as describe or it. So you can describe the test, it's the test, but you can also use it as a general thing. So as you can see, pretty straightforward. This is the whole file, but let's break it down, right? So if you want to write a test, what you do, like you can just import it as a describe or a it, then you import your assertion library, then you import your function, right? Then you just describe the test like you used to do. Like there's nothing new that I'm telling you here. You probably seen this if you did tests at least once with Jest. This is the default thing that you have seen at all times, right? There's nothing new. You can use the test function if you don't want to use describe. You can just like do test and you just put like sum. Sometimes people do a different thing. Like I used to do this a lot. If you change this import here to, instead of being test, being describe, then this becomes describe, and then this will still have to be t, and then it will be t test. It can be it as well, so you have to can change it here, like in t instead of t, you put it, and then it becomes a describe it syntax ish, right? It also supports function sync function, so both of the subtests and the functions also can be async, so you can also do this. So it's pretty much that. The assertions that we use, let me take this out. The assertions that we use are taken care of by the assert library, but this is built in. I usually like to use it, but I agree, I can reckon that it's not the best lib out there because it's not very easy to read and it's not very easy to, make sense of stuff. So sometimes I can use others like Chai. So Chai also does the same thing. The only thing that it needs to do is that the assertion library needs to throw, right? So you need to throw something, and this is going to be picked up by the test runner. So you can use whatever assertion library you want. But the important thing here that I want to show you is that the assertion is not actually tied to the runner, right? In Jest, for instance, you have the assertion library, you have the mocking library, everything is inside the runner itself, which is good if you want to just install and run it, but it's also bad if you just want to run a test and you don't want to do anything else. So if you want to, remove external libraries, of course you can edit, you probably can remove them. I don't know, I never did it, but the thing is, if you want to, it's not opinionated on that fact. You can actually install any assertion library that you want. You can also install other mocking libraries. Despite the Node Test Runner it has some mocking. I'm going to show you this, but the assertions are not tied to the runner itself. So you can do different things with less code. But how do you run this code, right? It's easy. It's even easier, right? So you just build. It has a built-in test flag, so you can just use node -- test, and then you pass on your test file, right? And then boom, it runs and gives you a tap output, right? A TAP output. You can see that it's quite fast here. It took 49 milliseconds to run. It's also a very simple test, but the test itself took 0.13 milliseconds. So it took about 40 milliseconds to start up. Or I haven't measured it yet, but it took some time to start up as well. But also it supports things like canceling tests, aborting tests early if you want via abort signals, for instance. It can be skipped, so you can have test.skip or test.only in the functions that you can skip the tests. You have to-do tests, so if you want to just add a placeholder test, you can to-do it. There's improvements in this coming up, because right now it's very difficult to pass a range of files unless you have a glob in it. So sometimes you can just use the output of a glob function to, send the test file names to this, but it's being worked on a better feature for this, right? The next thing I want to show you is the mock. Right, so mocking is one of the most important parts of a test, because you can actually, well, to be honest, is one of the best features that Jest has, for instance, because you can have the mocks inside, and Jest mocks are pretty amazing, but also it's based on Synon's mocks, and Node has them too, which is also based on Synon, I'm going to show you in the source. So the idea is that mocking, it supports mocking natively a few functions. You can have like context.mock.function, which is basically Jest function. You can mock a getter, a setter, or a method, right? It still doesn't support mocking of complete modules like Jest does, or even adding mocks inside mocks and stuff like this. So it also adds, for now, it supports mocking two more complex structures, but module mocking is coming in the future. I'm going to show you this soon enough. So the two more complex structures that I want to show you is one, timers. So this has been added by a very good friend of mine, Eric. I don't know if you know them, but he added this mock timers API to the test runner. The idea of the mock timers is to mock things like set timeout and set interval, or set immediate, things like this. So for instance, what we need to do, like we're importing things from like Node.js, describe it and stuff like this. Then we call the callback here. We just created a function, just nodejs. In this, we enable the timers. So when we enable the timers, we say, hey, I want to enable these timers, and I want these APIs. That the APIs that I want to enable the timers for is just set timeout. Everything else is not going to be mocked, just set timeout. And then I'm just going to create a timeout of a function that's just like a mock function for this timestamp. And then I'm going to assert if this function is actually being called. As you can see, this is going to run, like if you run this code, this is going to be correct, because it's not called yet. When you mock a timer, you are actually stopping the time, right? So you need to advance the time manually, like we did here. Like we tick the clock forward 99999 seconds, and then this will call the timer. This will trigger the set timeout, and then if we check if the function has been called, that's true, and then we can just reset. When we reset, we're going to remove everything from we're going to unmock everything, actually. We're going to replace the set timeout function with the original function, right? You can also import mock directly from Node test. So instead of just like using context mock, you can just import mock from the top here, and you can use mock timers name. But this is just like easier thing if you just don't want to, you just use the context from the test, right? Another one that is another complex structure that is able to mock is, I think, one of the nicest ones is dates. By me, actually. I added this support in October 23 last year, and it was a very big novella of adding it. As you can see, we have like almost 200 messages in that conversation, but I built on top of Eric's solution on set timers to mock the date object. And the date object is, at least for me in Klarna, because we deal with a lot of time-sensitive functions, is one of the things that I mock most in Jest. Using the fake timers. And this implementation that I use heavily builds on top of the fake timers functions from Synon. So basically, some of them are actually copies of the actual code tied up and modified to work in the Node environment. I'm leaving the link in here. In the end of the talk, you have the links for this talk, and you can, this is completely interactive, so you can click here if you want. This is how you actually mock the dates. It's the same thing. The only thing that you have to change is that instead of enabling the set timeout API, you enable the date API. So when you enable the date API, it's going to replace your date object with a mocked date object that starts in 0, which is the Unix epoch, right? So 1970, 101. And the idea is that you can just run from there. So basically, you're controlling the time now. And then you can tick this from some seconds or some milliseconds forward, and or you can also use the set date or set time to actually set a specific date, a specific timestamp that you want this date to be in. And then you can now assert that this date that we're out now is this specifically timestamp, is the specific timestamp that we're using. And then in the end, you can always reset everything. And well, we use this a lot in Klarna, especially because we have time sensitive functions that like, 15 days, 7 days, things like this, cron jobs that run. So it's something that we use heavily, mocking. Actually, we use ingest, but we are migrating this to be used in Node. Mocking dates is available in Node 21. And timers, the previous API has been completely overhauled, but the new change, this API that I'm showing you, it's Node 21.6, right? So if you want to try it out, Node 21 has it. I think that has been backported to Node 20 as well, but I'm not sure. Next up, it's code coverage, right? So next up, the Node test also supports test coverage. It's experimental yet, but you just need to enable it on the experimental test coverage flag. This will use V8's built-in coverage tool, right? So this is experimental, use with caution, but everything that I've seen so far, every time that I use it, was pretty much nice. Like, it wasn't very a big problem for us. So there's not much you need to worry about in here. But it uses natively the V8 function. So you need Node to be at least on version 20 to be able to use the test coverage function. So the only thing that's going to change here, we just run it with an experimental test coverage flag, and then it's going to run our test like normally. And then in the end, we're going to have a result, and then we have a coverage report. This coverage report, as you can see here in the lines, there is no coverage for line 3 and 4 of that function that we have. So basically, as you would expect, all the rest of the functions that we have here is they are completely covered, right? So I am still struggling with this. Okay, so when we look at these lines 3 and 4, we have the only line that we actually haven't covered on purpose, which is the throw line. It's the only line that we haven't covered. So the coverage function works normally, right? You can also change the test reporter. So if you're using another test reporter, another coverage tool that only understands like JUnit or LCOV or even text or dot reporters, you can use this. So you can just like change the flag test reporter. This is going to both change the reporter for the standard out, and also you can send this to a destination file, like you can see in the test reporter destination. So it's going to get you a lcov.info file that you can import on any coverage tool that supports it. But the test runner actually supports spec.tap, LCOV, and JUnit reporters. So 5 reporters right natively built in. But also the biggest thing that we're going to talk about is my favorite thing, because that's the technology I love the most, which is TypeScript, right? So TypeScript is supported in Node natively. This is like a parenthesis that I'm going to open here. I'm not sure if you all knew this, but it's possible to run TypeScript code natively in Node if you use something that's called importers. It's been called loaders back then, but you can compile TS code on the fly. These loaders are functions that execute before module is loaded, right? So when you do a import or a require in a function, Node is going to call these loaders. And then these loaders receive the whole text of the file, and then you can do whatever you want with those code, right? They can be used to transform the modules before it's imported. They can be used to transform stuff, remove code. This is a lot of things, like we have Babel loaders that allowed you to use things that were not in the Node.js. TypeScript uses a few loaders as well. Jest uses loaders for hoisting stuff. So you have a bunch of stuff that uses loaders that you can do it, sometimes even too much. This means you can actually transpile TypeScript on the fly. And some common importers that we use for TypeScript is TS Node, it's the most common one. TSX, which is new, which is the one I prefer. Some we have ESBuild as well. But let's take our previous example. The only thing that I did was to add typings basically here in those two functions that we have. So I added a number here and here. That's the only thing that I did, nothing else. And then we can just install TSX, obviously, because we need to compile the TypeScript code. Then we just use it. The file, we just run this file with node import -- import equals TSX, and then the file that we want to run. And boom, we have magic going on. The TypeScript file is actually going to be executed natively in Node. So this is magic, right? But if I told you that we can actually use the same thing with the test runner, right? So we can do the same import extension with the test file, the test.js. Let's just change the name of the file from JS to TS, and we are writing TypeScript, let's say. And then we can just run it with the import flag. And then boom, it runs exactly the same. It is going to parse the code. It is going to do a console.log. It's going to do exactly the same thing. Now look at this thing and tell me, look at the jestconfig.js that you have with 50 lines, and you've been maintaining this as a boilerplate for like 3 years, and tell me if this is not just like a bliss in your life right now, right? So some other support features from Node, aborting tests via abort signals, skipping tests with skip. To do, we have an only also as well. If you want only one test to run, we have lifecycle hooks like before, after each, for each one of those. We can filter names via regular expressions. This is still being improved. We have the external watch mode, which is experimental. And funny enough, for the future, Colin that I mentioned, one of the main contributors of the test runner, he has a wish list for 2024 on the Node test runner, right? So I have improved filtering, module mocking, but module mocking is one thing that I told you that's coming soon. So this is how he wants it to look. There is a few other things. I think I would change one thing or two here, but it's a very interesting proposal. We have improved filtering, like the one that I said, test name pattern and test only, because those two functions actually they require the test runner to know all the tests are going to be executed, right? So you have to parse everything before. Maybe more reporters. This is just me saying, but there is talks about more reporters. Snapshot testing. Snapshot testing is something that is also here in the Node. It was briefly in the Node test runner before. It was added and removed because of problems with the underlying implementation of the persistence mechanism, so it was not considered to be production ready. The next one is source map support, like you can see here. This is some wish list, like it can be things that is going to be coming later on, but it's not something that will be there, right? So sometimes it can be one of these more than they as well. More mocks like performance. This one I am personally taking and I want to work on this. So if you guys want to help, please do let me know. But the objective is to actually mock everything, to be able to mock everything in the test runner. And the end, my future for Node.js is the definite fall of Jest. Well, this is a hope, but I'm just kidding, right? So get involved. This test run is still in active development. You can get involved. Documentation is always a good place to start. You can contribute to the code if you want, maybe making Colin happy with his wish list, maybe, or just use it, give it feedback to us, and it's going to be awesome to have more people using it. And start shifting your projects to it, and help the community grow and ditch old tools. Maybe it's for something better, something more native, right? So thank you so much, and well. As I said before, these are all my socials. If you want to reach out to me, if you want to do whatever, please let me know. And this, if you want to, see, let me take my screen here. But if you want to, look at this this presentation again, these are the links that you have, the keyword code and everything else. And it's going to be on my website, right? So thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much for watching this, and see you soon.